At 12:40 p.m., on a quiet winter afternoon, the north end of Boston was suddenly drowned, not by water, not by fire, but by a moving wall of molasses. On January 15, 1919, the city was enjoying an unseasonably warm day. Dock workers took off their heavy coats, children played in the streets, horses clopped along Commercial Street, unaware that above them loomed a steel tank holding more than 2 million gallons of thick, dark syrup. The tank had been standing there for years, part of the Purity Distilling Company's operation, and most residents barely noticed it anymore. They had grown used to the smell of molasses in the air, sweet and faintly sour, clinging to the neighborhood like a permanent memory. Then the tank began to groan. Witnesses later said it sounded like a machine gun, metal popping, rivets snapping one after another. Some thought it was an explosion. Others said it was like the earth itself tearing open. Within seconds, the tank split apart, and a 25-foot-high wave of molasses surged outward with terrifying speed. The flood moved at an estimated 35 miles per hour. Buildings were ripped from their foundations. Wooden homes collapsed like paper models. A nearby firehouse was smashed in half, trapping firefighters inside. An elevated train trestle bent and twisted under the pressure. Horses were lifted off the ground and carried away, their legs stuck fast as the syrup hardened in the cold air. People did not drown in the way they expected. Molasses is heavier than water. It clung, it pulled, it stole breath slowly. Victims were trapped mid-step, mid-shout, mid-life as the sticky mass engulfed them. By the time the flood stopped moving, 21 people were dead. More than 150 were injured. The neighborhood was buried under several feet of syrup and debris. Boston had just experienced one of the strangest and deadliest industrial disasters in American history. In the days that followed, the city looked like a battlefield. Rescue workers waded through molasses so thick it pulled boots from their feet. The Red Cross set up aid stations. Sailors from the nearby USS Nantucket used salt water to hose down streets, but the syrup refused to leave. For months, everything was sticky. The smell lingered for years. Locals later said that on hot summer days, you could still catch a hint of sweetness rising from the pavement. But the real story did not end with cleanup. It was only beginning. The molasses tank had been built quickly in 1915, during a time when demand for industrial alcohol was soaring. Molasses was a key ingredient used to produce ethanol for explosives during World War I. The company behind the tank was in a rush to profit, and safety was an afterthought. The tank had never been properly tested. It leaked constantly, so much so that neighborhood children collected the dripping syrup in cups. Instead of fixing the structure, the company painted the tank brown to hide the leaks. Engineers later discovered that the steel walls were far too thin and the rivets were poorly installed. On that warm January day, fermentation inside the tank increased pressure, pushing an already flawed structure beyond its limits. The disaster was not an accident of nature. It was the result of negligence. What happened next quietly changed American history. In the aftermath, the Purity Distilling Company tried to shift blame. They claimed the tank had been sabotaged by anarchists, an accusation that resonated in a nation gripped by fear during the Red Scare. Bombings by radicals had recently shaken the country, and the idea of foreign agitators destroying industrial property seemed plausible to many. But the victims did not stay silent. Families of the dead filed a massive lawsuit, one of the first major class action suits in U.S. history. For 6 years, the case wound through the courts. More than 1,000 witnesses testified. Engineers, metallurgists, doctors, and laborers all took the stand. The trial transcript ran over 45,000 pages.
Slowly, the truth hardened like cooling syrup. Investigators proved that the tank had been dangerously underbuilt, that warnings had been ignored, that profit had been placed above human life. In 1925, the court ruled against the company. Victims received settlements, modest by modern standards, but groundbreaking at the time. More importantly, the case set a precedent. For the first time, a corporation was held publicly accountable for industrial negligence on a massive scale. The disaster helped usher in stricter building codes, safety inspections, and corporate liability laws across the United States. Engineers could no longer rely on intuition or speed alone. Calculations mattered, testing mattered, human lives mattered. Few Americans realize how deeply this strange disaster influenced modern safety regulations. Yet the Molasses flood also revealed something else, something darker. Most of the victims were working-class immigrants, Italian laborers, Irish dock workers, children of families struggling to survive in a rapidly industrializing nation. Their neighborhood sat next to the tank, not by chance, but by design. Dangerous infrastructure was rarely placed near wealthy homes. Risk flowed downhill toward those with the least power to resist it. The flood exposed the unequal cost of progress. As the years passed, Boston rebuilt. The tank was never replaced. A baseball field now stands near the site, and few markers tell the full story. Tourists walk by unaware that beneath their feet, people once suffocated in syrup. But history has a way of resurfacing. When modern industrial disasters strike, chemical leaks, refinery explosions, collapsing factories, the echoes of 1919 return. Investigations, lawsuits, the same arguments about profit versus safety. The same question, was this truly unavoidable or simply ignored? The Great Molasses Flood remains astonishing not because of its oddity, but because of its meaning. It proved that even the most unbelievable disasters can be real, that negligence can be as deadly as war, and that accountability, once demanded loudly enough, can reshape an entire system. On that January afternoon, no one in Boston imagined that molasses, a symbol of sweetness, would become an agent of death. But history has a way of not always arriving with fire or thunder. Sometimes it comes slowly, silently, and thick enough to trap a city in place. And once it does, nothing is ever quite the same again.